All right, students, get out of here. Go hang out with my son, Dawson. He's back there, and have a great time. Today, he's going to be talking to you about the categorical imperative by Immanuel Kant. And just kidding, he won't do that to you. Well, it's good to be with you guys here today at Image Church. I'm excited about the message today. We have a lot of ground to cover. 2 chapters, Ecclesiastes 6 and 7. And in those scriptures there, you see that Solomon is trying to make sense of life under the sun. You ever found yourself in that position? Trying to make sense of life. I just read a biography this past week on Vincent van Gogh, and he was a fascinating artist. But he was known as the tortured artist. He was somebody who just absolutely was wrecked on his insides. He grew up, his dad was a minister, and he wanted to find himself in a place of ministry at one point in his life, but he could never find stability. He had a very close relationship with his brother, and his brother was the one that would help his art to get famous. In fact, it was after Vincent van Gogh died. Did I say Leonardo at the beginning? No? Okay, good. I was like, wait a second, let's talk about the right artist here, right? It was after Vincent van Gogh died that his acclaim really took off. But he was starting to experience some of it, but his mental health was always getting in the way. He struggled with despair and with emptiness. In fact, he found himself in utter misery, and he was in a psych ward in 1888, and he went in there because he cut off part of his ear, and you know the story about this artist who cuts part of his ear off, and you go, well, there is a form of cutting that took place where he wanted to feel something other than his internal pain because life was so confusing. And yet, while he's in there, one of the beautiful things that comes out of it is several art pieces, and including Starry Night. What's crazy is his night was starry. His night was dark. Life didn't make sense. But from a psych ward, he would produce his magnum opus, one of the great art pieces of all time. And so after reading Van Gogh and thinking about him this week, I had this concept in my mind, and I drew this picture. And this was kind of my weird head, but if you've ever seen The Shining, I took the bartender from The Shining, and then I took Vincent van Gogh drowning in alcohol because of his struggle with alcohol. And there's a set of scissors next to him where he just cut off part of his ear, and I used his Starry Night as the background. But Vincent van Gogh, what an artist, as he sought to make sense of life. Is that you? Are you confused? Are you trying to make sense of life? Are you wondering what you're here for? Are you feeling lonely, empty, depressed? Bad things happen when we go looking to make sense apart from our Creator. Van Gogh wanted to be in ministry, and he gave it all up. And he even gave up belief in God for a while, and that's the interesting part about Starry Night, as I've said before. The only building in the little village that doesn't have light is the church. As if he was saying, I've lost hope in the church and now I got to find it in nature. He couldn't make sense of his issues inside the church. And I just want to say this. Sometimes people feel like they're too much for the church. And if you ever feel that way, well, that church has got to figure out a really important message, that no one is too much for God. And no matter what you're going through, no matter how deep your struggle is, no matter what type of sin you've ever committed, no matter how ugly you feel on your insides, we just welcome you to a seat at the table at this church, because we are a broken group of people, and the church is a hospital for sinners, and we don't want to be a shaming center, but a healing center. And so as you turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 6 today, I'm going to bring out 15 points, and I'm going to talk on each point for about 10 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. You're like, can you imagine that? I'd be like, well, you might talk, Bobby, about how this church is a hospital for sinners. Well, you're going to put us in the hospital if we have to listen to you that long, right? You're like, no, I'm going to take my own ear off, and I don't want to listen. All right. Now, here's the first point. 15 realizations worth considering if we're going to try to make sense of life, and it's this. Realize that chasing money and success for money and success' sake will never fill our void of discontentment. And we see this in the first 12 verses of chapter 6. Remember, what is Solomon doing in Ecclesiastes? He's trying to figure out meaning in life under the sun, meaning he's taking a naturalistic perspective, and he's thinking about, as a naturalistic mindset, how would a person go about and try to fulfill themselves apart from God? Now, Solomon is a believer in God, but it's a journey he goes on. And he's able to do all these experiences because of his wisdom and power and knowledge and money. And so he slips into all these different experiments with hedonism and promiscuity and spending money and power and success. And he says it's all hevel. It's all a chasing after the wind if we don't have our priorities right. Everything that we do in life must flow from the core of God being central. And if God's not central in our life, then guess what? There will be something else that shows up, and it will be center of your life. Every one of you has a center to your life today. How do you know if God's the center of your life? Well, do you show up for Him? Are you generous with your life? Are you serving Him? Are you generous with your resources? Do you worship Him? Are you a part of a church community? You can't say that God is your ultimate and then not do all that, because guess what? You know it and I know it. I'll show you that your ultimate is probably something else. Like, you know what? I'm too busy for all that stuff because of work. So career might be the God that you're really serving. Or, you know what? I'm on track to make a bunch of money right now, and money might be that God. Or power might be that God. Or you might have all kinds of addictions in your life and you can't be consistent. So addictions might be your God. What we serve the most is the thing that is our God, and that might be a lowercase g God, but it's not the uppercase G God. And if God is really your ultimate, you'll see it. You'll see it in the way you think. You'll see it in the way you act. You'll see it in your priorities. You'll see it in your checkbook. You'll see it in your service, in your community, and others will see it. It's a good question. You could ask people closest to you, do you think that God's my ultimate? If not, if you were just going to be honest with me and I'd just take it, what am I living for more than anything else in this world? What am I really prioritized by? Drop that on your spouse, on your kids. They'll tell you. And that can be a challenge. But if God's our, don't you want to be the kind of person that says, like Paul, to live as Christ and to die as gain? Well, in these verses, he says in chapter 6, there is an evil that I've seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him the power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. Now, when it says God doesn't give him the power to enjoy them, it's not that God wouldn't want the person to enjoy them, but when a person makes money their ultimate, then God doesn't give the person the power to enjoy their money, because money's never supposed to be our ultimate. And even Jesus said, man cannot serve God and money. Right? So how silly to serve the created instead of the creator. And so there's a wisdom to that. And so we can't read through all these verses, or we'll be here till dinner time. So you can ask questions about any of them in the Q&A time if you want. But the first 6 verses deal with kind of chasing money. The second 6 verses, verses 7 to 12, deal with success, right? And he says, all the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. And so what he's basically saying is, man, this person toils and he works so hard, yet he's not satisfied. And you know what? The fact of the matter is most people who chase money and success, they'll spiritualize it and talk about, oh man, God's blessing us with this and God's blessing us with this. But it's not. You can see it. It doesn't show up. They're chasing success. They're chasing power. God's not their ultimate when this happens in their life, and that will never ultimately satisfy. Now, we can enjoy some of the luxuries, like who doesn't like the finer things in life? But sometimes I even think we're like, oh man, God's really blessing right now. He's opening up these doors and giving all this money to us. But you go, is he really though? Or is that something maybe that Satan's doing, because he can just do that and keep you blinded from really getting sold out for Jesus, and you're blaming it on God? That can happen, and that's scary. Number 2, realize that who you are is more important than what you have. Chapter 7, verse 1, a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. With the right perspective, right? See, you can have a good name, and and that is powerful. But some people, what they do is they chase success. I remember reading a book many years ago called Ascent of a Leader. And the ascent of a leader is this: when you climb the corporate ladder and all you're doing is like growing in your knowledge and skills, but if you don't grow on the character ladder, all you're going to do is climb higher and higher, but you won't have the character to sustain yourself, and the fall will be much more difficult, painful, and catastrophic. Because the more platform, this is the problem with politics today, right? And I mean, I don't look at either candidate at all as a moral exemplar in my life. And it's just unfortunate, because we need to get back to character leaders, that you're not running on power and you're not running on things that you feel like, will just get you the vote, but virtue, wisdom, humility. And that's the sad thing, that who we are, you don't hear that from politicians about, I want to be a person of integrity, upstanding. I want to be loyal to my spouse. I want to be pro-family in such a way that I do whatever I can to help families thrive in our culture, not tearing it down. 3, realize it's better to live our vanishing life with purpose than to waste it through the pursuit of pleasure. Look in verse 2 of chapter 7. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind. And the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. I don't know about that, but we'll look at that and think, well, what's going on here? In other words, talk about the person who lives their life, right? And one of the things that can happen with this individual is they end up realizing in their life where it says, look at like verse, I got so many points today. I'm like, which verse am I on? Look at verse 2 again. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. And this carries the idea of the person needs to live in a reality. Some people always want to go to the house of feasting. Like they don't want to go to a funeral because they don't want to think about death. You ever have that? Like you try to bring up talks about death with a loved one maybe, and you just shut it down. We can't even talk about it. And so we don't want to live in reality. But it's better to live in reality and understand what life's all about than to act like nothing's ever going to happen. And that's an important aspect of life, right? Teach us to number our days, we learn in the scriptures. How can we properly number them if we're just living oblivious? So we need to realize that it is better to live our vanishing life with purpose, not just going to the house of feasting, right? For this is the end of all mankind. Or wait, what am I doing here? No, I'm right. There we go. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. In other words, those who are alive, they will take it to heart. They will recognize that everyone dies, and they will live with purpose. Like, your life is all you have. Make your life count, right? Right now counts forever. Make the most of the time. You're like a disintegrating piece of flesh working into grains of sand, going through the hourglass of time. And there's a vanishing point whereby we will be ushered in to a new life, obviously with God. But this is what's happening, right? Like, all of us we're becoming invisible. We're fading away. We're shedding. And we need to do what God has wired us for. But the temptation is life can overwhelm us, and we check out and we start living for our own fantasies and for our own pleasures and for money, and we drown ourselves out. And sadly, this can happen, but it doesn't help us to live the life that God wants for us. Fourth, I'd say that we need to realize that remaining teachable before a sage trumps being entertained by the blissful ignorance of fools. Look with me, if you will, in verse 5 of chapter 7. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the songs of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. It's meaningless. It just vanishes. This also is a vanity. And so we want to remain teachable in our life. Teachability is an absolute essential ingredient to growth. If we do not have teachability, we cannot grow. And we have to have this in our marriages. Kids, you've got to have teachability with your parents. Parents, we have to have teachability with our kids, with our bosses, with our friends. The relationship stops if we can't be teachable. And pity the person that surrounds themselves with yes people and uses intimidation to quiet the people who will actually speak up and give an honest appraisal of one's life. My wife and I used to have this thing called Share the Beef Night, and it's kind of nice because you can have the beef buildup, right? Instead of just beefing each other all the time, you have the beef buildup, but you give each other permission to share the beef, right? And you can know that instead of nagging each other, you just kind of put this point on hold and you say, you know what, let's have a conversation once a week at this time. And then it's just a checkup. And it's all about being non-defensive. It's all about listening. It's all about validating. You cannot grow if you're not teachable. And unteachable people, they use things like anger or silent treatment or blame or skirting the issue or whatever. And you know what a lot of that is narcissism. A lot of narcissists are the most unteachable people in the world. In fact, narcissists are very difficult to teach. What makes it so agonizing is the narcissist thinks that he has the thing to teach everybody else, but doesn't realize that he's the one in need of learning. The narcissist is obstinate. It's toxic. In fact, it's so bad that even counselors go, I don't even know that you can change the narcissist. It's like the one condition they say it's so blinding that they live in another reality and they're the victim and everybody else is wrong. Well, I don't believe that they can't change. But if you've ever dealt with that, it's tough. Teachability is a friend of ours, and we should embrace teachability. We all need it. And you know what? There's nothing like life beating us up enough to make us teachable. Now, we want to listen to wise people, but don't be so teachable that you don't discern. Because that's the other word. Like there's a flip side. You're unteachable, you can't grow. You're too teachable, you can be led astray. And so that happened to me a lot when I was a new believer. I knew I was a dumb butt when I got saved. My best thinking got me a seat in AA. I mean, wrecking multiple cars, drinks and drugs and all the consequences of my life. I was at the end of myself, totally uneducated. I didn't think I knew anything, so I just would be way too impressionable. And so people could tell me anything, and I was really just kind of gullible because of that. And so that's why we always have to keep growing. Fifth, realize that caving into the temptation of oppressing others leads the wise into moral compromise. In other words, you could be a wise person, but find yourself in a compromised situation because life gets difficult and be tempted to oppress somebody else for the sake of easing the pain. And history's littered with people who have oppressed others, sadly so that they could have power and so that they could have more ease at the expense of others. And that's moral compromise. Think about the whole slavery history with William Wilberforce in England, and before the abolition, before they could bring an end to slavery with the abolishment of that, Wilberforce had to recognize something. I can't just stay stuck in my church. I got to have a voice, and I got to speak up for those that don't have a voice. And that also meant I need to be willing to give up my government entitlements and benefits for the sake of those who are oppressed. And so that's what happened. Became willing to give up the entitlements of being able to have the benefits of the service of the Africans that came over from Africa there in England. They had to be willing to give that benefit up to recognize the equal dignity. And right at the end of his life, the victory happened, abolition of slavery. And thank God that Wilberforce and other Christian believers that were out there made a difference, recognizing that we are all equal in God's sight. And we can't oppress others for our own gains, that it's wrong. And when we do that, we morally compromise our integrity. In fact, that is something you see in verse 7. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Look, drives the wise into madness. A wise person can do something really stupid, and that's scary too. But then the next point is we need to realize that painful patience is better than succumbing to the price of impatient shortcuts to achieve success. You know, we all are enjoying how quick we can get things, right? I mean, I kind of like the whole Amazon stuff. I mean, there's times you order it and it just shows up that day. But in a lot of ways, like, I don't know that we're being taught to wait well anymore. Like, how do we wait on God when we can get anything so quick in our life? And I get a little bit nervous about that. Now, I used to be the most impatient person that my parents ever knew. You know, I mean, I could not wait. I was impulsive, got myself in a lot of trouble. And when we get impatient, we get ourselves in trouble. Not waiting on the Lord will lead to consequences, because it just means that we're going to take life into our own hand. We're going to start making decisions, and we're going to fumble. And boy, have I done that a lot in my life. But I think I've been beat up enough now, like where I wouldn't say it can't happen again, because it sure can. I mean, all I got to do is get stuck in traffic. Like, you want to know where I get impatient? Is with bad systems. Like when you got 5 people behind the desk, cashier, and one's doing the work and the rest are talking, and you got to line out the door. I'm going to lose it, right? Like, if you're there, if you ever see Pastor B, like don't, like, I can get strong. I could be like, one of you needs to figure out what the heck is going on around here and start leading this place, all right? Like that can happen to Pastor B, right? If I get on the freeway, I don't like my pet peeve is like, do not ride my tail. I will bust you up for that, man, right? I will hit my brakes so hard Like, do not ride my tail. Like, I do not like that. Now, some of you are going, boy, this pastor really is corrupt. Now, I never said I wasn't, number one. But let's be honest. I'm just being honest. And if you were being honest and you had to get up here and try to connect with people through your sin, I'm sure you have some material to offer too for us. We've all got quite the supply. And so mine's impatient comes out in lines and bad systems that don't move people, right? I don't do good. So I just need people to realize that, when I go into public, it's all about me and my comfort and the pace that I want to go at, right? Because that's kind of what I'm thinking when I'm in that space. But anyway, shortcuts to achieve success, don't take them. Be patient. Wait on the Lord. It's tough to wait, I know. Verse 8, better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better off than the proud in spirit. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They'll mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. We read that in Isaiah. Beautiful verses right there. Wait on the Lord. Be still. Know that he's God. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. And so we wait on the Lord at times. Next point I'll draw out is we need to realize that one easily offended inevitably plays the fool. We see that in verse 9. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Don't be easily offended, Solomon tells us. Now, there can be somebody that's broadly easily offended, but then there can be somebody who's narrowly easily offended. But the person who's easily offended always has toxic relationships around him or her. And unfortunately, if you couple that point with what we were talking about earlier, then it could always be other people's fault. And that's really bad. Because then you're the victim. And then that puts a weird space, because then that can lead to dark space for us. So don't be easily offended, Solomon reminds us. That's to play the fool. Be teachable. Listen, learn. 8th, realize that now is all that we have, so don't overly romanticize the past. Wow. Let's look at this in verse 10. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Right? Like they go out of Egypt. They're in slavery, right? In slavery. And they go out of Egypt and they're in the wilderness and they miss their chains. Like we have historical amnesia, don't we, as humans? Like the past is always better than it was in our mind, and the present is always worse than it really is, and the future is always going to be great. Well, that's a really good recipe for disillusionment, because life is marked with ups and downs, with ebbs and flows for every single one of us. So don't overly romanticize the past, and don't live there. Don't get stuck. And don't go through life, for all of us, being a victim. That is not a good mentality, and it's tempting. You want to know where I told my wife, I said, sometimes my mental health stuff can be such a burden that I think I just want you to pity me. Now, you guys are thinking that, wow, like, yeah, there's been times where the anguish has been so tough. She's like, why are you talking about this like so much? We're just talking, like I'm talking about when I'm in a real bad space. I think I just want some pity right now, man. I'm just hurting. Well, we all want a little pity when we're hurting, right? But we can't crave that. Otherwise, we'll live in a victim mentality. And I have to realize that other people have mental health problems. I'm not the only one here. And I got to pull up my boots by the bootstrap and play the man and live and be responsible and realize that life's going to have difficulties, and all of us have our share of some hard trials in life, but I can't live and dwell on my mental health condition all the time. God doesn't want me living in that, and I don't want to live in that. And so we need to realize that if we live in that, And you know why I don't want to live in it? Because then I'm going to romanticize the past. And if I romanticize the past, then as a dog returns to its vomit, then I'm going to return to the past, and I'm going to miss Egypt. And guess what? Then I'm going to have more mental health conditions. Now, just so you know, I'm doing really good as a checkup. But I had that at one feeling. I don't feel that anymore. But because I authentically get real with my heart, I go, I think I'm feeling this. And then I go, why am I feeling this? Okay, why am I feeling that? Why am I feeling this? Where did that start? Okay, I think this is the core. No, that can't be the core because it's A, B, C, and D. Okay, but you add an E, then G is the problem. Okay, that's the issue. Okay, let's go after that. And then I present it to the Lord, and then he'll work it out of me because I don't want to stay stuck. Realize that now is all we have, so don't overly romanticize the past. Next, realize that wisdom tells us that we will either use wealth or wealth will use us. Verse 11 and 12. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, right? Like money can have a protection. It can protect our emotions from worry. It can be that thing. But there's a wisdom that needs to be had when it comes to resources. Some people will spend more money on one simple vacation than they'll ever give to the Lord in an entire year of earnings. And you go, it's just a me-centered view of money. That it's all for me. It's my pleasures. It's the things that, and we have to be very careful with that because we will take wealth and we will use it for, wealth might not be the God, it might be status. And wealth becomes the means because I have to have status. I have to always have the best name brands. Now, I think this is a good name brand. My dad gave me this over the weekend, so... And I don't mind. I like the finer things in life, but I'd like to know that I can give that stuff up, that I'm not holding on to it at any time. And I'm not sure that we're always really honest when we answer that. Like if God said to you, I want you to go and get a Pinto and turn in your luxury car. How many of you go, dude, I'd be pretty embarrassed driving around that Pinto. Like I'd be ducking, right? Like I would go out incognito like I was a movie star. I wouldn't want anyone to see me in a Pinto. Would you drive around a Pinto? Like I had that test happen to me when I was, like remember Mom and Dad, I wrecked all my cars. And then I had to buy a car. They would buy me brand new cars and everything. I mean, I wreck them. I ended up paying $500 for a little Chevy Sprint. And the ignition was hanging from the car. And it had cowskin seat covers. We dragged the baseball with this field with this thing. God brought me so to the end of myself that I could actually just drive secure in a $500 Chevy Sprint with cowskin seat covers and ignition hanging. I could have never done that without brokenness. I was better than that car. I'm not sure I would drive that right now. I'd probably need a lot of work again. Like it rebuilds. Right? Like this rebuilds. It's like that stuff can happen to us, right? But no, God can always do that in our heart, but it's good just to do those heart checks. Realize that wisdom gives us the ability to trust God with mystery. Look at verse 13. Consider the work of God, who can make straight what he has made crooked. Life's filled with mystery. Soren Kierkegaard was a Danish philosopher who lived in the 19th century, and he was confounded by God in his ways as a philosopher. And he's known as an existentialist who talked about taking the leap of faith because God could confound us all. And so I captured his leap of faith in this drawing. Here's Kierkegaard taking his existential leap of faith, and he's just jumped off the high rises. But what he's doing is he's taking a leap of faith as he dives into the hand of God, trusting in the Lord. Sometimes we won't understand anything, but are we willing to trust? 11, we need to realize that we shouldn't trust in our own righteousness or grandiose wisdom, yet nor should we choose to be righteous. And you can find, or choose to... That was a... Yeah, choose to be just a real, sinner. Choose to be foolish. And you can see that in the next couple verses And I'll let you look at those in verses 16 to 18. And in 12, realize that wisdom is more powerful than power, for wisdom is power. Look in verse 19. What do we read in chapter 7 of verse 19? Well, wisdom gives strength to the wise man more than 10 rulers who are in a city. In other words, there's a strength to wisdom. Wisdom is power. And you can have all the power in the world, but without wisdom, be a complete fool. And that will not help anyone. In fact, it was Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century philosopher, who claimed the death of God. And that is a foolish statement. And what he talked about is we have to have this will to power. And he talked about this Übermensch idea, the overcomer, that each of you need to become your own Superman and carve out your own pathway because God's dead. And so we take life into our own hands. Well, I saw this image in my head of Nietzsche, so I drew this. And this is Nietzsche and his Superman vision. And you can't see the bottom, but I put God's burial at the very bottom. But notice what I did with this vision. I turned his cape into his kryptonite. The Superman vision is Nietzsche's kryptonite. If you say God is dead, that will make you dead. While he thinks he's flying free, he's disentangling his life because he's flying in a cape of kryptonite. And a life that doesn't consider God under the sun will live a life clothed with kryptonite. And as we keep reading these points, we want to consider that the 13th point is that if you live for the words of others, you will become fragilized by them. Whew. Some people are living for the approval of others, for the words of others. And you know what? Honestly, some of you have deserved some words from others, from a spouse, from a child, from a friend, from a parent. And that's really difficult to go through life and not get words from your loved ones. I think my mom was 40 the first time her dad said, I love you. 42. 42 years old before her dad ever said that he loved her. Like my grandpa, his ultimate was work. He loved working. Mom knew that he loved, you got to figure out what that means, how someone expresses love. And that is wisdom too, by the way. Know what someone can give. Understand why they can't give something and still love them. That's part of getting rid of the expectations that we put on others, because what we'll do is we'll go around and start getting mad at people for not saying certain things. But words can be so meaningful, right? Like the Bible says, words of gold are like apples, or a word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. So good. Nicely presented words, like apples of gold in settings of silver. Maybe you're somebody that you could give some proper words to somebody that that you've been withholding, and you could do that. But don't live for the words of others, because those words we can't count on. What we live for is the word of God and the words that are in here. And that will be something that helps us. Next, I would say that we need to realize that gaining a dose of modest wisdom doesn't arrive by accident. It comes through disciplined determination. And by the way, for the words, verses 21 and 22, you can look at those. Wisdom doesn't come by accident. It's hard work. There's just no shortcut to being a person who thinks with wisdom. I would encourage you for an application, maybe just start reading a proverb a day in your quiet time. I did that for years. I'd take a proverb a day and just read through it and just let that sit there just to gain wisdom. But do whatever you can to develop wisdom, because it will protect us from being foolish in our life. And commit to God's wisdom for your life. His wisdom is the wisdom that's going to lead us. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 1, we see these great verses. And check out the benefits of reading Proverbs. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. This is just the first few verses of Proverbs. Here's the verses. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance to understand a proverb and a saying. The words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. And this is the problem with our culture right now, why it's collapsing. We are after values that aren't eternal in nature. We're not after the right values today. We've got our values all scrambled up. Wisdom needs to guide our leaders. Wisdom needs to guide our families. Wisdom needs to guide our marriages, the places we work. Without wisdom, you insert a multiple Supermans who have their own visions. And when their visions clash, well, it becomes a kryptonite to the community. And I fear that we're flying around in a cape thinking we're free, but we're really destroying ourselves. And finally, realize that life, in it is better to reflect on the importance of wisdom over folly and to do so in advance. I used to do this a lot with my kids growing up, and you can see this in verses 25 to 29. The last verse, verses 23 and 24. We've got 2 chapters we're covering, so it's tough. But teach your kids to think wisely. What is wisdom? I mean, it's oftentimes learning how to think in advance about the best pathway and the least amount of consequences in a way that pleases God. And so you just do a lot of discussions with your kids. Teach them. Okay, let's just play this out. I'm watching you right here. And let's just say the values that I see you living with right now, if those are still your values 10 years from now, what should we expect your life to look like? Right? So it's like, what were my values when I was a teenager? I mean, finding every girl that I could hang out with, right? Being promiscuous, getting drugs and alcohol and partying. Well, guess what? It was fun for a season, but it started to create consequences. Not only that, several of my friends, it would kill them down the road. How much would that have been helpful for me just to think, if I continue like this, is it sustainable? And what will these actions do to rob my future? And all of us have to think ahead of time. Like, look, if we don't learn to think ahead of time, it's like when I was suffering from my doubts, wondering if I'm going to walk away from Christianity when I was getting hammered years ago. Before I walked away, I would ask, well, what other worldview am I headed toward? And then I would think, okay, well, what if I head to this worldview? Then I would stop and think, well, what would be the doubts that I would have developed there? And then how's this worldview going to answer these questions? I go, okay, maybe I like the way it answers this question better, but it sure isn't going to answer this question better. And by the time I was done going on that journey, wisdom said, stay put. And wisdom said, it would be foolish to go into these other beliefs because Christianity offers the best cumulative case for what is true. Well, as we wrap up, I have one more piece that I drew this past week. And this is the Joker. We all know the Joker. But as you look at the Joker and you think about this individual, Arthur Fleck. I mean, this was a person who life didn't make any sense to. And he couldn't make sense of his life. And what does Arthur Fleck do when he can't make sense of life? Well, Arthur Fleck creates a fantasy and becomes the Joker. And that's what we will be tempted to do. If we can't make sense of life, well, then we might just create a fantasy and then try to live that out. But the sad thing about Arthur Fleck is because he couldn't make sense of life, he was miserable with mental health. And the first Joker, he's asked by the counselor, are you having any negative thoughts? That's all I have are negative thoughts, which, by the way, is one way to be miserable. And so what does the person with negative thoughts do? The person who is dying on the inside, can't smile on the inside, he has a chronic laughing disorder to match the face that he's painted on of a smile. And it's basically walking hypocrisy because he walks around with a mask of a smile and outbursts of laughter, but he's totally out of context because he's empty on his inside because he can't make sense of life. And in the end, if you see the second joker, the problem with living for fantasies is fantasies die because there is no joker. And if there is no joker, then guess what? Life was just a joke. And Solomon in Ecclesiastes says, don't buy in to these fantasies of hevel, of chasing success, of chasing power, of being the fool, of going after promiscuity, of going after status. Chase God's going to be his conclusion, and we'll get there. And that's the way of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But having wisdom means that we're okay with some mystery. Life's an enigma, but there's still some clarity. And I thank God for that. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for allowing us to connect today, and may your words be meaningful. And if anybody doesn't know you, Jesus, that's the great news about the scriptures, is you came to make sense of our life. In your death, you said, let me make sense of the problem with the world. The problem with the world is that they are separated from me, they're broken, and they're walking in sin. But let me share with you the solution. The solution to making sense of this problem is me. It's not alcohol, money, power, drugs, all these. It's me. And Jesus, on the cross, you showed us that you were the final piece of the puzzle to make sense of this awfully confused life of ours. And if anyone's confused today, may they by faith say, Jesus, thank you for showing me that the problem is that I need you. And I ask you to forgive me for my sins. And by faith, I want to trust in your death, burial, and resurrection on my behalf. Amen.
Well, thank you again for checking out this live stream of Image Church. We exist to help you discover why you were created. And we believe that the first step in that discovery is a relationship with Jesus Christ. If you have any questions about what that is or how that can happen in your life, please email us at info@imagechurch.live. If you are interested in connecting with other Image Church community members, please join our Facebook group or an in-person small group at either of the links on the screen. For more information about who we are and how you can get involved, please visit imagechurch.live. I'll see you next week.